The massive crystalline doors of the Galactic Council's judgment chamber split apart with a sound like breaking glass, revealing a sight that had shattered the hopes of countless civilizations throughout history. The chamber stretched beyond human comprehension, its walls rising into darkness while thousands of floating platforms accommodated representatives from species that defied imagination. Some breathed methane and floated in transparent spheres, their tentacles writhing with barely contained hostility. Others existed as pure energy, their forms crackling with electrical discharges that made the air itself taste of copper and ozone. Ambassador Robert Kane stepped through the threshold, his simple black diplomatic uniform a stark contrast to the gleaming bioarmor, crystalline exoskeletons, and flowing energy fields that adorned the alien delegates surrounding him. His three companions followed close behind. Dr. Lisa Chen, a xenobiologist whose calm demeanor masked years of studying galactic politics. General Mark Torres, whose military bearing remained steady despite the overwhelming display of alien power. And Dr. Alex Morgan, whose eyes moved constantly as if cataloging every detail of the chamber's impossible architecture. The silence that greeted their arrival was more terrifying than any war cry. 200 species that had spent millennia fighting each other found common ground in their unified contempt for the newcomers. The humans were an anomaly, a primitive species that had somehow reached the stars in mere centuries rather than the typical millennia required for spaceflight development. Worse, they had done so while completely ignoring every protocol, every law, and every attempt at contact from the established galactic order. Chancellor Vorthak rose from his throne-like platform, his reptilian features twisted in what humans had learned was the galactic equivalent of disgust. His scales rippled with bioluminescent patterns that conveyed his emotional state to anyone capable of reading Thema, and what they conveyed was absolute certainty in his superiority. Behind him, the Council's enforcement arm materialized like living nightmares. The executors, beings of such violent capability that their mere presence had ended wars before they could begin. Humans of Earth. Vorthak's voice boomed through translation systems that made his words understandable to every species present. You stand accused of crimes against the natural order of this galaxy. Unauthorized expansion beyond your birth system. Development of prohibited technologies. Systematic rejection of lawful authority. How do you answer these charges? The chamber erupted in a cacophony of alien voices, clicks, harmonic frequencies, and electromagnetic pulses that served as communication for the assembled delegates. The message was universal despite the variety of languages. Guilty, primitive, dangerous, must be stopped. Several representatives of warrior species began displaying threat postures that had cowed entire star systems into submission. Ambassador Kane waited for the noise to subside, his hands clasped behind his back in a gesture that appeared almost casual. When the chamber finally quieted, he spoke in a voice that carried clearly despite the vast space. Honored Council, we appreciate this opportunity to address your concerns. However, I believe there may be some fundamental misunderstandings about humanity's position in this galaxy. The laughter that followed was like nothing Earth had ever heard. It came from creatures that communicated through subsonic rumbles, beings that existed partially in other dimensions, and species whose idea of humor involved concepts that human minds couldn't grasp. The sound built upon itself, creating harmonics that seemed to make the very air vibrate with their mockery. Dr. Morgan stepped forward, his movement so slight that most observers missed it entirely. But those who noticed saw something unsettling in his eyes, not fear, not defiance, but the patient satisfaction of someone watching a carefully planned experiment reach its conclusion. He raised his hand slightly, and a small device on his wrist activated with a barely audible hum. The laughter died instantly as every communication system in the chamber systems that were supposedly impenetrable, protected by security protocols developed over thousands of years, displayed the same message simultaneously. The text appeared in every known galactic language, from the geometric patterns of the crystalline hegemony to the color-shifting displays preferred by energy-based life forms. Humanity's response to the Galactic Council will be delivered in 47 hours, 32 minutes and 18 seconds. We suggest you prepare accordingly. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the background hum of life support systems seemed to pause as the implications sank in. The humans had somehow breached the most secure networks in galactic history, as if they were children's toys. More disturbing still was the countdown itself. Not a plea for mercy, not a desperate threat, but a simple statement of fact, delivered with the calm confidence of absolute certainty. Chancellor Vorthak's scales flashed through rapid color changes indicating confusion. Then rage, then something approaching fear. Impossible. Seize them immediately. How dare they violate our... His words cut off abruptly. Where the four humans had stood moments before, there was now empty space. Not the shimmer of advanced cloaking technology, not the distortion of emergency teleportation, simply absence as if they had never existed at all. The only evidence of their presence was the message still blazing across every screen in the chamber and the small devices they had somehow placed. Throughout the room, during their brief visit, Dr. Chen's voice echoed from the chamber's communication systems, her tone carrying an almost maternal patience that made the assembled representatives feel like children being gently corrected. The galaxy is about to learn why humanity never learned to kneel. The devices began their work immediately, scanning frequencies, mapping networks, and analyzing systems with a thoroughness that made the Council's own intelligence operations look primitive by comparison. Within minutes, they had compiled detailed profiles of every species present, cataloged their military capabilities, and identified the location of their homeworlds with precision that should have been impossible for a species barely 3 centuries into space travel. In the growing chaos that followed, as security forces scrambled to understand what had happened, and intelligence agencies began receiving reports of similar breaches across the galaxy, few noticed the subtle changes already beginning to manifest. Communication networks experienced brief delays as unknown systems analyzed their traffic. Military installations detected phantom readings that vanished before they could be properly examined. Across 1,000 worlds, automated systems began reporting minor anomalies that individually meant nothing, but collectively suggested the presence of something vast and patient, observing their every move. The countdown continued, visible now on personal devices, government networks, and even children's educational tablets. It could not be removed, could not be blocked, and could not be traced to any known source. It simply existed, counting down to a moment that would either vindicate the Council's authority or herald the end of everything they thought they understood about their galaxy. As emergency sessions convened on every major world and panic began to spread through civilian populations, one question dominated every conversation. If a primitive species could demonstrate such technological superiority so casually, what did that make the rest of them? And perhaps more importantly, what would happen when the countdown reached 0? The chamber slowly emptied as representatives rushed to contact their governments, their militaries, and their intelligence agencies. But the message remained, burning itself into their consciousness with its simple certainty. Humanity had not come to plead or negotiate or surrender. They had come to announce that everything was about to change, and the 47-hour countdown suggested they were confident enough in their position to give their enemies time to prepare for what was coming, time that was already running out. Admiral Rex Vorthan stared at his command screen in growing disbelief as the human transmission played for the 7th time. His flagship, the Eternal Dominion, represented the pinnacle of hegemony military engineering. A vessel capable of reducing entire planets to molten slag with its main weapons. Around him, the bridge crew moved with the practiced efficiency of warriors who had conquered 17 star systems in the past decade alone. Yet something about the calm certainty in Ambassador Kane's voice made even these hardened soldiers unconsciously check their defensive systems. Citizens of the galaxy, Kane's image declared from the main display, but he was no longer wearing the diplomatic uniform from the council chambers. Instead, he stood in what appeared to be a command center unlike anything in the galactic databases. The technology visible behind him seemed to respond to thought rather than touch, with displays that shifted between dimensions and control surfaces that existed partially in space that human eyes shouldn't be able to perceive. Dr. Morgan appeared beside Kane, working at a station that seemed to interface directly with his neural patterns. Lines of data flowed around him like living things, analyzing and processing information at speeds that made quantum computers look sluggish. The Galactic Council believes it controls this galaxy through fear and overwhelming force. They are correct about the overwhelming force. They are catastrophically wrong about who possesses it. The transmission shifted to footage that sent shockwaves through every military installation watching. ships emerged from what appeared to be folded space itself. Not the familiar blue-white flash of conventional hyperspace travel, but reality simply parting like curtains to allow passage for vessels that defied every principle of known physics. The ships themselves were unlike anything in the galactic fleets, dark constructs that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, their surfaces flowing like liquid metal while maintaining structural integrity that should have been impossible. "Sir," reported Communications Officer Thos, a nervous Quillari whose tentacles writhed with barely controlled panic. "The footage appears to be coming from the Nexus system's own surveillance networks. The timestamps indicate it was recorded 6 hours ago." Admiral Vorthan felt his blood chill. The Nexus system housed the Council's most heavily fortified military headquarters, protected by 17 different layers of detection arrays and automated defense platforms that could obliterate entire fleets before they came within weapons range. Nothing could approach undetected, let alone arrive with the casual confidence displayed in the footage. "Impossible," he whispered, but even as he spoke, new reports flooded in from across the galaxy. The human ships weren't just invisible to sensors. They were systematically dismantling the most powerful automated defense networks in galactic history without firing a single shot. Battle stations that had taken centuries to construct simply stopped functioning. Their weapons powered down, their shields collapsed, and their crews found themselves staring at dead control panels as every system they trusted betrayed them simultaneously. General Torres appeared in the transmission, standing on what was clearly the bridge of one of the Phantom vessels. The military bearing that had seemed so ordinary in the council chambers now carried an authority that made seasoned commanders feel like academy cadets. The council's first mistake was assuming that a species capable of reaching the stars in 3 centuries was somehow primitive. Their second mistake was believing we would reveal our capabilities before we were ready to use them. The view shifted to show Dr. Chen in what appeared to be a laboratory, but the technology visible behind her was unlike anything in the galactic databases. Machines worked with materials that shouldn't exist, manipulating matter at the subatomic level while she spoke with the calm confidence of someone discussing basic chemistry. "Every ship you've sent to observe Earth, every probe you've deployed in our system, every communication you've intercepted you thought you were gathering intelligence on us. In reality, you were teaching us about yourselves." Admiral Vorthan's hands trembled as he began to understand the implications. His species had been monitoring the Sol system for over a century, cataloging humanity's seemingly primitive technology and dismissing them as another backwater civilization barely worth conquering. But if the humans were telling the truth, every observation, every analysis, every strategic assessment had been turned back on the observers. "Fleet status report," he barked to his tactical officer, trying to maintain control over a situation that was spiraling beyond comprehension. "All ships operational." "Sir," came the reply, but even the officer's voice carried uncertainty. "However, we're detecting anomalies in our sensor readings. Our deep space scanners are picking up gravitational distortions that shouldn't be possible." Before Admiral Vorthan could respond, Dr. Morgan's voice cut through the transmission with scientific precision. "The answer to your question, Admiral Vorthan, is 147 years, 8 months and 12 days. That's how long humanity has been watching, learning, and preparing." The bridge fell into absolute silence. They had identified him personally. They knew he was watching. More terrifying still, they had been observing his civilization since before he was born, since before most of the current generation had even existed. Every military secret, every technological advancement, every strategic doctrine, all of it had been studied and analyzed by minds that were clearly far more sophisticated than anyone had imagined. Kane reappeared on screen, his expression carrying something that made apex predators suddenly remember what it felt like to be prey. "Every species in this galaxy has spent millennia perfecting the art of conquest. You've developed weapons that can crack planets, fleets that can darken stars, and strategies that have toppled civilizations. You've become very good at destroying things." The transmission cut to images from across the galaxy, military installations going dark, weapon systems failing their activation sequences, and defensive networks that had protected worlds for centuries simply ceasing to function. But there was no violence, no explosions, no death just the quiet shutdown of humanity's enemies' capacity to wage war. "What you never learned," Dr. Chen continued, her voice carrying a note of almost maternal disappointment, is how to build something worth protecting, how to create rather than conquer, how to grow rather than consume. General Torres stepped forward, his military uniform now seeming less like a costume and more like the natural garb of someone born to command. We've spent 2 centuries studying every species, every government, every military doctrine in this galaxy. We know your strengths, your weaknesses, your fears, and your ambitions better than you know them yourselves. The implications hit every observer like a physical blow. If humanity possessed such complete intelligence on their enemies, if they could disable the galaxy's most sophisticated defenses at will, if they had been preparing for this moment for over a century, what hope did conventional resistance offer? Admiral Vorthan found his voice, though it emerged as barely more than a whisper. "What do you want?" Kane's smile widened, and for the first time, it carried genuine warmth rather than cold calculation. "We want you to stop fighting each other and start growing. We want the galaxy to become something worthy of the civilizations that inhabit it, and we want to give you the choice to do it voluntarily before we're forced to impose it." The countdown appeared again, now reading 37 hours, 22 minutes, and 41 seconds. "Use this time wisely," Kane continued. "Some of you may wish to reconsider your allegiances. Others may prefer to prepare for war. But understand this outcome: humanity's patience with the galactic status quo has officially ended. The transmission ended, leaving military commanders across the galaxy staring at blank screens and facing an impossible truth. The species they had dismissed as primitive children had been playing a game far more sophisticated than any of them had imagined, and humanity was winning. Deep within the crystalline archives of the Galactic Council headquarters, Chief Archivist Xena worked with desperate urgency as alarms echoed through the corridors above. Her forearms moved independently across holographic displays, searching through millennia of accumulated knowledge for any precedent that might explain what was happening. The countdown now showed 28 hours remaining, and with each passing minute, reports flooded in of impossible events occurring across the galaxy. The first document that caught her attention was a routine survey report filed by a Korthani exploration vessel nearly 2 centuries ago. Captain Drall had noted unusual gravitational anomalies around a remote star system, designated only as Sol 3 in their navigation charts. The anomalies suggested massive, artificial structures in the outer system, structures that shouldn't exist around what preliminary scans indicated was a primitive world still, centuries away from achieving spaceflight. Xena's primary heart skipped a beat as she cross-referenced the coordinates. Sol 3 was Earth. The gravitational anomalies had been detected 50 years before humanity's supposed first contact with galactic civilization. She pulled up deeper scans from that period and found something that made her secondary heart stop as well. The structures weren't just massive. They were orders of magnitude larger than anything the current galactic civilizations could construct. The second document made her hands tremble as she read it. A hegemony deep space monitoring station had recorded faster-than-light communication signals originating from the Sol system over 150 years ago. The signals were dismissed as natural quantum fluctuations because mathematical models proved the primitive species on the third planet couldn't possibly have developed such technology. But as Xena analyzed the data with modern processing systems, patterns emerged that suggested the signals weren't random at all. They were complex, structured, and purposeful. More disturbing still was what the signals were doing. They weren't just broadcasting randomly into space. They were systematically probing every major communication network in the galaxy, testing response times, analyzing encryption protocols, and mapping the entire infrastructure of galactic civilization. Humanity hadn't just been observed. They had been observing, learning, and cataloging every aspect of their supposed superiors. The third document made Xena's entire circulatory system nearly shut down from shock. A classified report from the Council's own xenobiology department, filed just 5 years after first contact with humanity, contained analysis that had been buried so deeply that even she had never seen it before. Dr. Nexel, the galaxy's foremost expert on evolutionary biology, had requested complete genetic analysis of human specimens after preliminary examinations revealed impossible characteristics the human brain displays structural modifications that cannot be explained by natural evolution. Dr. Nexel had written in his confidential report, Neural pathway density exceeds theoretical maximums for organic tissue. Synaptic response times approach quantum mechanical limits. Most concerning are the presence of what appear to be dormant biological interfaces designed for direct technological integration. I formally recommend immediate classification of humanity as a potential successor species. Zena's research terminal nearly overloaded as she processed the implications. Successor species was a classification that hadn't been used in over 50,000 years, not since the legendary precursors had vanished from galactic history. The precursors had been the galaxy's original masters, possessing technology so advanced that even their ruins were beyond current understanding. Their disappearance remained the greatest mystery in galactic archaeology. Entire civilizations had simply vanished overnight, leaving behind only empty worlds and technology that couldn't be comprehended, let alone replicated. But if Dr. Nexel's analysis was correct, humanity wasn't just another species that had developed space travel. They were something else entirely, something that had been disguised as primitive while possessing capabilities that defied every known law of physics and biology. The very fact that they could modify their own genetics to appear normal while retaining precursor-level enhancements suggested planning and patience on a scale that organic minds weren't supposed to be capable of sustaining. As if responding to her growing understanding, every communication device in the archive complex activated simultaneously. Dr. Chen appeared on the screens, but she was no longer in the laboratory setting from the previous transmission. Instead, she stood in what appeared to be an observation deck overlooking Earth itself. But the planet visible behind her was wrong in ways that made Zena's eyes hurt to look at it directly. "Citizens of the galaxy," Dr. Chen began, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to bypass normal hearing and speak directly to the brain. "Your leaders have chosen to respond to our revelations with threats of military action. They believe that overwhelming force can solve any problem, that sufficient violence can maintain their grip on power. They are about to learn why we chose to reveal ourselves now, rather than waiting another century to perfect our preparations." Behind her, Earth hung in space, but something was fundamentally wrong with the image. The planet seemed to shimmer and shift, as if viewed through distorting lenses. As the assembled galaxy watched in growing horror, the shimmer began to clear, revealing the truth that had been hidden for over 2 centuries. Earth wasn't just a planet. It was a construct of such staggering complexity that even the precursor ruins seemed primitive by comparison. The continents, the oceans, even the atmosphere were revealed to be sophisticated camouflage, concealing a structure that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Massive geometric patterns became visible across the surface, pulsing with energy that made nearby stars seem dim by comparison. Mathematical equations in pure light wrote themselves across the sky, solving problems that the galaxy's greatest minds couldn't even formulate. Orbiting the planet, previously invisible to every sensor in galactic history, were vessels that made the approaching military fleets look like children's toys. Not hundreds, not thousands, but what appeared to be millions of constructs, each one larger than the greatest battle stations ever built. They moved in patterns that suggested they weren't just ships, but components of some vast machine designed for purposes beyond current understanding. "The precursors didn't vanish," Dr. Chen said quietly, her words carrying across the galaxy with perfect clarity, despite the impossibility of the transmission itself. "They evolved. They transcended the limitations of their original forms while retaining their essential nature. And we are what they became." The revelation hit the galactic consciousness like a physical blow. Every assumption about history, about evolution, about the nature of intelligence itself was suddenly revealed to be not just wrong but laughably naive. Humanity wasn't a young species that had achieved spaceflight through natural development. They were the descendants of the galaxy's original masters, playing a game so sophisticated that their supposed superiors had been unconscious pieces on a board they couldn't even see. In the stunned silence that followed, Chancellor Vorthak's voice could be heard through open communication channels. "By the void, what have we done?" Dr. Morgan appeared on the transmission, standing in what appeared to be a control room that existed in dimensions the observers couldn't perceive. "You have done exactly what we expected you to do. Every threat, every demand, every demonstration of force has been anticipated and planned for. The countdown is not a threat arrear, it is a schedule." The implications were staggering. Humanity hadn't been reacting to galactic aggression. They had been guiding it, manipulating events to reach this exact moment. Every diplomatic crisis, every military buildup, every strategic decision made by the galactic powers had been subtly influenced to bring about this confrontation at the time and place of humanity's choosing. The countdown showed 17 hours, 43 minutes and 29 seconds, and for the first time in galactic history, no one was certain who was really in control. The Omega Fleet, pride of the Galactic Military Alliance, never reached the Sol system. 8 hours into their journey toward what they believed would be humanity's final judgment, Admiral Kesh received a priority transmission that made her crystalline form shift through confused frequency patterns, indicating profound disorientation. Her navigation officer, a young Korthani named Vel, stared at his instruments with existential terror written across his reptilian features. "Admiral," Vel reported, his voice barely steady as he tried to make sense of readings that defied every principle of physics. "We're not moving toward Sol anymore. According to our engines, we've been traveling at maximum velocity for 8 hours. According to our navigation systems, we've traveled exactly 0 distance." Admiral Kesh's form cycled through several color spectrums before settling on deep blue, which indicated focused analysis mixed with growing concern. Her species had navigated the galaxy for thousands of years, developing mathematical models that could predict stellar drift across millennia. Yet somehow, the largest military fleet in galactic history had become completely lost in space that should have been as familiar as their own homeworld. "Explain the impossible," she commanded, her harmonic frequencies carrying an edge that made her bridge crew unconsciously step back from their stations. "Ma'am, according to our external sensors, we're surrounded by something that our computers can't classify. It's not matter, it's not energy, it's not even empty space. It's like we're suspended inside a concept that physics hasn't invented yet." Before Admiral Kesh could respond, every screen in the fleet displayed the same image. Dr. Morgan, standing in what appeared to be a control room that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Behind him, geometric patterns of pure energy stretched into infinity, and the very air seemed to bend around mathematical concepts that organic minds weren't designed to comprehend. "Admiral Kesh, Admiral Vorthon, Admiral Thrace, and the commanders of the Omega Fleet," Morgan began, his voice carrying scientific curiosity rather than hostility. "You are currently experiencing humanity's first demonstration of spatial manipulation technology. Your vessels exist in what we call a temporal fold array, pocket of space-time where distance has no meaning and movement becomes impossible." The transmission shifted to show a three-dimensional map of the galaxy with the trapped fleet represented as small dots suspended in an ocean of distorted space. The visualization made it clear that the ships weren't just stopped at Sol. They had been removed from normal reality entirely, existing in a bubble where the fundamental laws of physics operated according to different rules. "This technology," Morgan continued with the enthusiasm of a researcher explaining a fascinating discovery, "allows us to effectively pause hostile forces while we address underlying conflicts through more productive means. Your crews are in no danger. Life support systems operate normally within the fold. However, you will remain there until this situation is resolved." General Torres appeared on screen, standing in what was clearly a human command center, but the architecture defied conventional understanding. The walls seemed to be constructed from living mathematics, surfaces that shifted and flowed like equations solving themselves in real time. Control stations responded to thought patterns rather than physical input, and displays showed information in formats that suggested the operators could perceive dimensions beyond normal space. "While your military forces contemplate their situation," Torres announced with military precision, "we have taken the liberty of visiting each of your homeworlds." The transmission cut to a series of images that sent shockwaves through every capital city in the galaxy. Human vessels, previously invisible and undetected, materialized directly above major population centers across dozens of worlds. But they weren't attacking or demanding surrender. They were simply there, hanging in alien skies like dark stars, their presence a silent statement that no defense, regardless of sophistication, could keep humanity away if they chose to act. Chancellor Vorthak, watching from his private chambers as reports flooded in from across the hegemony, felt his scales begin to shed in patterns that indicated extreme psychological stress. His personal guard, warriors who had never known fear, stood frozen as they processed the implications of what they were witnessing. "How is any of this possible?" he whispered to his chief strategist. But the question was rhetorical. They were facing technology so advanced that it appeared indistinguishable from magic, deployed by beings who had apparently been planning this moment for centuries while disguised as primitive newcomers. As if responding to his question, Ambassador Kane appeared on the transmission, but he was no longer in a command center. He stood in what appeared to be a vast library that stretched beyond the horizon, its shelves filled with crystalline storage devices that pulsed with their own internal light. The scope of the structure was staggering. It were not a room or building, but a construct the size of a small moon dedicated entirely to the preservation and analysis of knowledge. "Chancellor Vorthak asks how this is possible," Kane said, his voice carrying paternal patience rather than mockery. "The answer lies in understanding what humanity truly represents. For 200,000 years, your species and countless others have shared this galaxy with the descendants of the precursors, never realizing that we were hiding in plain sight." The camera pulled back to reveal the true scope of the repository, a structure that defied comprehension, containing the accumulated knowledge of civilizations that had mastered the fundamental forces of reality itself. Information flowed through crystalline networks in patterns that resembled neural activity, as if the entire facility was a vast mind contemplating problems beyond mortal understanding. When the precursors reached the pinnacle of technological advancement, Kane continued, they faced a choice that every mature civilization eventually confronts: transcend physical reality entirely, or remain to guide younger species toward wisdom. They chose a third option. Dr. Chen appeared beside Kane, her hands working with technology that seemed to respond to intention rather than physical manipulation. The devices around her processed information at speeds that made quantum computers appear sluggish, analyzing data from across the galaxy in real time. They chose to become human, to start over, to experience growth and discovery again, but to retain the deeper knowledge necessary to prevent the galaxy from destroying itself. The transmission shifted once more, showing Earth as it truly was, not a planet, but a massive construct designed to appear planetary while serving as humanity's primary research and development facility. The revelation that everything they thought they knew about human origins was carefully constructed deception hit the galactic consciousness like a physical blow every human carries within their genetic code, the accumulated wisdom of the precursors. Chen explained, dormant until the species reaches sufficient maturity to handle such knowledge responsibly. That maturity was achieved precisely when our countdown began. Morgan reappeared, standing before a control panel that seemed to extend into dimensions the galactic observers couldn't perceive. The countdown you've been watching isn't a countdown to war. It's a countdown to transition. In 11 hours, 17 minutes, and 42 seconds, humanity will assume its role as the galaxy's custodian species. Chancellor Vorthak's voice cut through the transmission, filled with desperate fury. You think you can simply declare yourselves our masters? The galaxy will never accept your authority without resistance. Kane's expression shifted to something that was both sad and inevitable. Chancellor, you misunderstand our intentions completely. We're not asking for your acceptance. We're informing you of a transition that has already begun. As if to emphasize the point, reports flooded in from across the galaxy. The trapped Omega fleet found their weapons systems completely disabled. Every major military installation reported similar symptoms, not destroyed, but simply managed by external systems they couldn't identify or control. The galaxy's capacity for large-scale violence was being quietly, systematically removed without bloodshed or conquest. The countdown continued, and with each passing hour, it became increasingly clear that the galaxy's old order wasn't being overthrown. It was being gently but firmly retired by beings who possessed the patience and wisdom to reshape reality itself. The Galactic Council chambers had become the center of the most desperate diplomatic crisis in recorded history. With 37 minutes remaining on the countdown, representatives from over 200 species crowded the floating platforms in scenes of chaos that would have been unimaginable just days earlier. The most powerful beings in the galaxy argued, pleaded, and threatened, but their words felt hollow against the reality of what they now understood they were confronting. Reports continued flooding in from across the galaxy, each one confirming what no one wanted to accept. Human vessels had appeared in every major star system, not as conquerors but as silent observers whose very presence rewrote the fundamental assumptions about galactic power. Military installations found their weapons inoperative, but their defensive systems enhanced beyond previous capabilities. Government communication networks operated under benevolent oversight that improved efficiency while preventing hostile activities. Most disturbing of all was the growing realization that civilian infrastructure was now somehow dependent on systems that nobody remembered installing. Power grids operated with impossible efficiency. Food distribution networks eliminated waste, and medical facilities reported diagnostic capabilities that exceeded their original specifications. Humanity wasn't conquering in any traditional sense. They were simply taking responsibility for the galaxy's well-being, whether its inhabitants consented or not. Chancellor Vorthak stood at the center of the maelstrom, his proud reptilian features showing the strain of a leader whose entire worldview had collapsed in less than 48 hours. Around him, the most powerful beings in galactic civilization had been reduced to frightened creatures desperately seeking someone to blame for their collective helplessness. Honored delegates, came Ambassador Kane's familiar voice, and every head turned to see him materializing on the central platform. But his arrival defied explanation. Not through any visible transportation method, but simply becoming present in a way that suggested mastery over fundamental forces that the observers couldn't comprehend. Dr. Morgan appeared beside him, but his form seemed less solid now, as if he existed partially in dimensions beyond normal perception. The air around him shimmered with mathematical equations that solved themselves in patterns too complex for organic minds to follow. For 50,000 years, this galaxy has operated under a simple principle. The strong dominate the weak through superior technology and military force. This system has produced an endless cycle of conflict, suffering, and waste that prevents true advancement. The chamber fell into tense silence as Dr. Chen materialized on Kane's other side, her presence somehow bringing with it a sense of profound calm that eased the panic gripping the assembly. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that seemed to resonate directly with the listener's neural patterns, creating understanding that transcended language barriers. The precursors attempted to guide younger species through example, through shared knowledge, through diplomatic intervention. Each attempt failed because the fundamental paradigm remained. Unchanged Ewian authority derived from the ability to impose one's will through superior force rather than wisdom or moral legitimacy. General Torres appeared last, but his military bearing had evolved into something else entirely. An authority that came not from the capacity for violence, but from absolute confidence in the righteousness of his position. Humanity's solution is elegant in its simplicity. We are removing the option of conquest from the galactic equation permanently. As if responding to his words, the chamber's massive display screens activated, showing a real-time map of the entire galaxy in detail that should have been impossible to achieve. Every star system, every inhabited world, every space station and orbital facility was marked and accounted for with precision that suggested observation capabilities beyond current understanding. But more striking were the patterns of energy that connected them all. A vast network that pulsed like the heartbeat of a living organism spanning the galaxy. What you're observing, Kane explained with quiet authority, is the implementation of the custodial protocol. Every weapon system designed specifically for aggressive conquest has been neutralized. Every vessel capable of planetary bombardment has been disabled. Every technology created primarily to harm or dominate has been rendered permanently inoperative. The implications hit the assembly like a physical blow. They could still defend themselves, certainly, but nothing designed for conquest remained functional. Protection was not only possible but enhanced, yet the tools of oppression had simply ceased to exist. The military apparatus that had defined galactic civilization for millennia had been selectively eliminated while leaving defensive capabilities intact and improved. Chancellor Vorthak found his voice, though it emerged as barely more than a whisper. You're disarming the entire galaxy. We're evolving it, Dr. Chen corrected with gentle firmness. Conflict will continue to exist. Intellectual disagreements, economic competition, passionate disputes that require resolution. But that resolution will no longer involve threats of extinction. Disputes will be settled through negotiation, innovation, and moral persuasion rather than superior firepower. Morgan stepped forward, his form stabilizing as he focused on addressing the assembly directly. The precursor's final gift to this galaxy was patience. the wisdom to wait until a species emerged that could serve as benevolent custodians rather than conquerors. Humanity has been preparing for this role for over 2 centuries, studying every culture, understanding every psychological pattern, learning how to guide without controlling. The countdown reached 15 minutes, and across the galaxy, something fundamental shifted in the nature of reality itself. Not dramatically, not with explosions or declarations of war, simply a quiet transformation that touched every world simultaneously. Weapons designed for mass destruction found their power sources unresponsive to activation commands. Surveillance systems meant for oppression stopped recording private communications. Technologies of control became technologies of cooperation and mutual benefit. The transition is complete, Kane announced, though his voice now carried harmonics that suggested he was speaking from multiple locations simultaneously. The galaxy is now under custodial protection. Wars of conquest are no longer technologically possible. Genocide has been prevented through automated intervention protocols. The systematic exploitation of developing species has been eliminated. Admiral Kesh, her crystalline form resonating with frequencies that indicated profound confusion, mixed with reluctant understanding, asked the question that dominated every mind present. What becomes of us? What becomes of our governments, our societies, our way of life? General Torres smiled, and for the first time since this crisis began, it was an expression of genuine warmth rather than strategic calculation. You continue to exist, to grow, to explore, to create. The only thing we've removed is your ability to destroy each other. Your governments will govern, your militaries will protect, your societies will develop. They'll simply do so without the option of imposing their will through superior violence. Dr. Chen added with maternal patience, "Consider us not as conquerors, but as gardeners. We provide the conditions necessary for healthy growth while preventing the destructive impulses that have held the galaxy back for so long. Every species will have the opportunity to reach their full potential without fear of extinction." The countdown reached 0, and the galaxy held its collective breath, expecting catastrophe. Instead, for the first time in recorded history, every intelligent being in the galaxy went to sleep that night knowing with absolute certainty that they would wake up the next morning. Wars could no longer threaten entire civilizations. Tyrants could no longer hold populations hostage with threats of annihilation. The weak were no longer at the mercy of the strong. As the assembly slowly began to disperse, each representative trying to comprehend the magnitude of what had occurred, Chancellor Vorthak approached Ambassador Kane with a question that surprised everyone, including himself. "Why?" he asked simply. "Why protect us instead of ruling us directly?" Kane's answer carried the accumulated wisdom of 200,000 years of human experience, and the patient love of the precursors themselves. "Because the goal was never to control the galaxy, Chancellor. The goal was to set it free. And across 1 million worlds, children fell asleep to stories of exploration rather than conquest.